So welcome to Gabbing with Girlfriends. And hi, Jeff Scheel. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to be a girlfriend
Always
again.
and forever.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Okay, I have to jump straight into it because I can't stand the fact that you all played and I wasn't there. So Gravity Kills put a show together, all on their very own, which just goes to show how grown up and efficient they are. Once upon a time, that would have never happened, but they did. And I decided that I was going to surprise them and just come in. And like 3 days before the show, I did something to my back, which didn't make me immobile, but it made me miserable. I really couldn't do a lot. I could drive and I could move, but I was in pain. I was really in pain. So the most I was doing was kind of 2 Advil every 4 hours. And anyway, it eventually corrected itself, but I was convinced I did something that was going to require surgery or that I was going to spend the rest of my life like that. But I was pretty miserable for a good 2 weeks. So now that my excuses are out of the way, tell me. So go back to how it all first started.
The show. Well, we had talked about doing one a long time ago. I say a long time ago, maybe a couple years ago, and pre-pandemic. Let's put it that way. And then, of course, 2020 happens. Everything blew up, and so everything was kind of, we weren't really even talking about doing a show. And then Kurt and I started talking about how it would be really cool if our kids got to see us play. Because unlike your kids who grew up, Terry was a working musician from the time that they were born. In fact, I saw you, you and I were at I was at the first show you ever took Biff to
in Dallas
in 1981 with Ronnie. And, but something popped up. I'm on like a DFW because I lived in Dallas and went to college and grad school there. I'll get to the show. But anyway, something popped up that made me think of you today, which was Campisi's restaurant. Somebody had posted, which was that Egyptian restaurant that was is near downtown. That's the restaurant that you guys went to eat at.
How do you know that?
Because you told me.
Oh.
And I remember stuff. So anyway, we were talking. It'd be really cool for the kids to see us. And then, the wheels started turning. Kurt had done some work for Pat Hagen, who's the guy that runs the pageant in Del Mar Hall in St. Louis. It's a Live Nation room, both of them Live Nation rooms. And so he had done some work, and so he had a relationship with Pat. Plus, Pat goes all the way back. If you're from St. Louis or if you're a musician that's gone through St. Louis at some point, you probably played Mississippi Nights, and that's where Pat came from. So started talking with Pat. I have to go, actually, it goes a little bit further back than that. Joe Litvag, who buys for the Factory, which is the new venue out in Chesterfield, same size as the pageant.
Oh, where is it? I didn't even know about this place.
Yeah, it's if you know if you've been, when's the last time you were in St. Louis? Ages and ages.
7 years.
Okay, well, there's a top, down in Chesterfield Valley.
Yeah.
Okay, where there's Old Navy and all that stuff down there, right? Across 64 or 40, the highway that runs down through there. On the other side, on the side where the Missouri River is, they built a huge another shopping center and all this stuff. And the Factory is in that. It's the same, same capacity as the pageant.
So is that other venue still out there? I think it was just called an arena. I can't remember what it was called.
Out in Chesterfield or out?
Yeah, out in Chesterfield. Maybe toward St. Charles, maybe.
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, and I'm up there all the time. So anyway, so Joe and I started talking about doing a show with Tommy Mattern, of course. Being that we have very little social media presence. We haven't had a record out in 22 years coming up.
Gosh.
So I know. So anyway, so we started talking with Joe, and then that kind of fell apart. for whatever reason. And then we started, Kurt really, really wanted to do it, because his two youngest, we did a show in 2005 at the pageant. His two oldest daughters came to the sound check, but that was 2005. So they didn't come to the show. So anyway, and they didn't even remember it.
Yeah, of course.
So that was the motivation. And once we decided to do it, you were talking about everybody really using our talents, I guess, to put the show together. Kurt kind of he knew Pat, so Kurt really negotiated the deal. I buy talent, so Kurt would call me and go, "Hey, what do you think about this?" or whatever. And Doug started working on the show itself, as far as any sort of tracks we needed or any of those kinds of things. So he started working there. Kurt started working on.
So where are you now, time frame?
Okay, so we start working on the show in about July, maybe. So Kurt starts working on video content. We employ, if you're from the St. Louis area, there's a show that goes on every Christmas season into New Year's at the pageant. They sell out 7 nights. Band it's called El Monstero. Well, they sell out 7 nights every December. It's crazy. Only in St. Louis could this happen, by the way, because they do a Pink Floyd show. They play, and they'll switch up about 3 songs a night. So anyway, we employ the guy who basically the production company that does that, plus the sort of the creative director of that show to start putting together a light show. And so we have, it's crazy because back in the old days, maybe we rehearse for a couple of weeks and maybe we'd have a production rehearsal for 3 days or something. Yeah. So we kind of know where, not to be to get hit by the keyboard stand or whatever on stage. Right. So I start singing, back into the getting prepared for the show. All the guys did the heavy lifting. Like I didn't do any of the heavy lifting for the show. Kurt did the merchandise. Doug did all of our point of sale for our, for selling merchandise on site. And we have a merch store now, which we've never had before. Doug took care of all that. Doug took care of, those guys did put together the show. All I had to do was, they were like, you just come up here and sound like you're 30 years old. That's all we care about. And so my preparation was, while these guys are doing all this stuff, I mean, they worked their ass off on the stuff. Doug was still dealing with point of sale stuff the day of. And, so anyway, Kurt's designing t-shirts, ordering merchandise, doing all these things, getting video together, having meetings with the production company.
How great to be a singer.
Yeah.
Able to kind of.
Oh my God. It's the typical singer thing, right? Like I don't show up for load in and, but so I started Gloria, I hadn't had to sing more than 2 songs. Well, I take this back. 2014, I put together a Depeche Mode tribute band for an art show, pretty big art show up in Tulsa. And that was the last time I'd done a show where I had to do more than 2 songs, but it's Depeche Mode stuff. So it's like, it's like, it's pretty, it's like, if you did Gravity Kills music, it'd be like stepping out and doing Michael Bublé or something. I mean, I'm a huge Depeche Mode fan. David Gahan is, that's maybe if I had a Mount Rushmore of bands, Depeche Mode's on it. So anyway, but it's super easy vocally. So I started rehearsing here. I put a Spotify list of the set, and then I just plugged in a mic, and I just sang with the set every other day. And I did that for 4 months.
And did you do any songs that you had never done live before?
No, we had talked about it. But since we hadn't played
Oh, I get it. I get it.
2012, we were like, you know what? Let's rely on some mental muscle memory
Yeah, of
types of
course.
thing. And, me remembering lyrics, I didn't want to go up there with, we had the capability if I wanted to use a teleprompter, and we had all those capabilities. And, we really technically stepped into 2023. I mean, we had, we were running time code to 3 or 4 computers. Front of house looked like NASA. It was a different deal, right? And we had the capability to do all those things. I didn't want to do that. I was like, I wrote a lot of these lyrics. The guys pitched in, of course, with that stuff, but I didn't want to go out and have to stand there and kind of stare down at a screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really, really worked on that. And plus, I really wanted to revisit the way I sang those songs, because we know it's all nostalgia for people. This isn't, this wasn't and that's what this thing sort of became. Like when tickets went on sale, Gloria, we went on sale, and all this stuff, but people watching this don't. We went on sale at the smaller venue, an 800 cap venue, sold out in an hour. So we were like, we moved into the pageant, and, we just at that point, we figured out, and people were coming in from Canada and from San Diego. You'd hear, and again, our social media is very small, right? But the people are connected to us are hardcore fans.
I love it.
And St. Louis, it's of course St. Louis people. St. Louis is a very unique town. When they back a band, you were at our first show. I mean, we played for 1,000 people. People didn't know what I looked like.
Yeah, they knew one song.
Yeah, and maybe they had heard the demo version of Goodbye off of Mortal Kombat. Maybe.
Right.
So anyway, so it just became something bigger, and everybody really stepped up and prepared. Even down to, Doug, how hard Doug worked at performing. But Doug worked so hard musically on the show, and he bought gear. Matt had to buy new gear. Because the stuff we used, like the wireless system that I used, Gloria's illegal now.
Oh, no.
So it's
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because of the cell phone thing and all. So and Kurt invested in a bunch of stuff, and and when I walked into rehearsals about a week and a half before the show, we hadn't played together. I hadn't seen Doug since I saw you at his wedding.
Wow.
I hadn't seen Doug. The last time I saw Matt was at a surprise birthday party that his wife put on for him, and that was like 2018. And then the only time go ahead.
No, I was just trying to remember when I saw him, because he came to LA with his family, but I don't remember what year that was. Maybe 2016, maybe.
Okay. And I see Kurt at funerals because we're relatives. So I hadn't seen any of these guys. And of course, I walked in, and to explain the dynamic of a rock band to people, like the dynamic that existed within our band. And we all had these roles, and we all had very distinct, how do I put this without
personalities? You had very distinct individuals.
And we butted heads a lot, which bands do. And so I walked in. It got to the point where Kurt asked me if I was dying.
Why?
Because I was just so nice to everybody,
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I was hugging everybody, and I was thanking them every rehearsal, and I was.
Oh, I love that.
And so because the guys worked so hard, and then so we did the rehearsals. We did a full production rehearsal the Friday before, because Pat Hagen at the pageant, they let us come in on the Wednesday. We had so much production, there was no way, like for the scale of the room, we could not get, unless we were to hire probably 3 times to have 3 times the labor call. we wouldn't have got the production up in one day. So they went in on Wednesday. They started working on focusing and doing lighting scenes and all that stuff, which they'd already been working on at the
And
warehouse.
rehearsals.
Right. And in the meantime, our sound guy, a guy named Rusty, he was we were just working with our monitor guy in rehearsals, but our actual front of house guy was in a different part of the warehouse mixing, doing, working on mixing and effects and all that stuff in a totally different part of the warehouse. Like so it wasn't, so we weren't sort of commingling, those two, those two places. And so anyway, so the guys just did an absolutely amazing job. And I did something at the show that I'd never done in, I don't know how many shows we played, 1,000 shows or something like that. I'd never introduced the band before. I did it one time, sort of tongue in cheek, at the Second Point Fest that we closed in 1998.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
How did I let you get away with that?
I don't know, because I was an asshole, and
Maybe.
so yeah, and everything, we were so happy to be doing it, and and I introduced all the guys, and everything was so heartfelt, and I had to turn around after I finished the introductions because I started tearing up.
Oh.
And because it was so, everything about the entire day was so different, and obviously we're not touring, we don't have to worry about selling a record. There were tons of tickets sold. There was no pressure there.
Oh yeah, you're able to just walk in and feel good.
Yeah.
And that was it.
And that was it. And I had my family with me all day, and they shared the entire experience with me all day.
So special. That is so special.
And it was so cool. And my daughter, who you met briefly one of the last times we did this, I couldn't really see her. The first 3 songs, she just cried the whole time. She was so proud of her dad. And then she walked into the dressing room and looked at me and just started crying, and just put her face in my chest and just cried.
Oh, I get it. I so get it. It's just what an amazing feeling that has to be for everybody. To be able to see your dad, you've always known about this. You've always known this is something he did. And to be able to live it with you is just, I can't even imagine.
Yeah. And you would have got a kick out of being there, only because, we're doing this for people that haven't had the conversations we've had, but, John Perrone, Gary J are there.
Oh no, the text I got all night, that was just between Tommy Matter and Gary and John. I'm I couldn't tell if I was happy to get the text and the pictures and the videos. Mm-hmm. I was, or if it was just making it worse that I wasn't there. I'm not sure, but I was glad I got that, but it was killing me.
Yeah. And Chris Frank from Indigoot was there as well, because he's local to St. Louis. And he also does he does an air shift on KC 95 as well. I don't know how, but he was there. And so Mike Peer and Gary and John are in the room. Chris is in the room as well. And we're like, what year is it?
Oh my God, I didn't know Mike was there.
Yeah, Mike Peer was there. He brought his son, because Mike lives in St. Louis.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. And Mike,
I had no idea.
Yeah, and so Mike was there, and
how? But wait a minute, back up. How did he know about the show? Do you stay in touch with him, or did it come from John, or he just knew?
He knew, because we, we're friends on social media.
He's not still in radio though, right?
No. He has a company he has an event company. It specializes in kid events. And
no interest. That's so interesting. I love it.
But he looked Mike Peer, he looked more rock and roll to me than when he was music director at K-Rock New York. And he had 2 earrings, and he had this crazy jacket on, and it was great to see him. And his son, of course, was with facial hair and stuff, and his son's in his 20s. And so his son had never seen the band, and Mike takes some pride in Mike will Mike's story. if Mike ever sees this, is, he's the first guy outside of, it was him and Lynn Barstow when they were at Kanak in Austin. First guys to play Gravity Kills outside of St. Louis. And, and so that's, and so he was there, and that was super cool. And, we'd never done a VIP meet and greet before. And
they didn't exist back then, I don't think.
Remember, we did meet and greets for fan club members.
Yeah, but that was kind of just our thing, as opposed to being, kind of an official.
Yeah, and people didn't pay extra. They paid they paid their $20 a year to be in the fan club, right?
Yeah.
And but we, and that was even cheap, I think, because I've looked at VIP stuff, and ours included a ticket to the show and all that stuff. But John and Gary were laughing the whole time. They're like, "You guys are like taking way too much time." I mean, we were. Especially Doug and I, we're just super chatty with people, and Doug and Matt is so agreeable, and Kurt, is just, Mr. Put his arm around you. And so we just did that with 100 people, and we ran on time the whole day. Like, nothing was late. Of course, the one Doug moment, he's going to watch this maybe. Our VIP meet and greet was supposed to start at 3:00. And, it's 2:59 and Doug's not there.
Oh, surprise, surprise.
At 3:00, he walks on stage. And again, the difference in the band, 25 years ago, I'd have been all bent out of shape. And
yeah.
I just walked up to him and said, "I'm glad you're here," and gave him a hug. And so anyway, so the whole show was great. I vocally, I feel like I did. If you've seen any clips, I sounded better than any show that we've done probably since 2002. I mean, my voice hasn't aged, and only because I haven't used it. It's sort of set in it's
on
sat
a shelf somewhere waiting.
Right. And so I haven't been abusing it for the last 25 years or whatever. So
when this episode runs, I have to put up some footage too from that night, because just the things I saw, everybody sounded great.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah. We were really proud of the way it sounded. Now if Terry ever watches your podcast, he'll get this. When something else we weren't used to, with the amount of cell phones that happen at shows, and because people had cell phones back in the day, but you couldn't.
No, they were the size of a shoe anyway,
right?
So you'd be silly holding it up.
But what happened was we had an issue with it interfering, and it was just on the opening song, Guilty. Maybe 2 other songs where all the phones came up, and it messed with Doug's in-ears. And so we had, coming out of the gate, it was rough. We had issues, and we were all frustrated and panicked, and it lasted for about 16 bars, lasted for about, I don't know how, 30 seconds or something. Now everybody's been out of shape. Kurt's freaking out, and I had to go back to Kurt. And I could see that, and I turned around on one part of the song, and I just looked at him. And I said, "I love you." And then I kind of brought him back in, and then we kind of got it together. But I told the guys what was cool about that moment was we had to figure it out as a band again. It wasn't just about this muscle memory of remembering songs. Now all of a sudden we had to get together as a band and work our way out of this almost catastrophe that happened at the beginning of the show. And I thought that maybe that moment actually helped us. It sort of catapulted us. It gave the show a different energy. Now all of a sudden we were a unit again, versus 4 guys that hadn't played together in since 2012 and just trying to get through it. We were 4 guys together trying to get through it. And I was so proud of everybody. And of course, Doug beat himself up after the show and went into one of the dressing rooms backstage and closed the door. And And I sent, we had a friend fly in, Jefferson City guy. I mean, dates back to going to high school with these guys. And I sent him in there. And in hindsight, Doug has a different look at the show, but yeah, it was amazing. And it was, I don't even know, like, if we never did another show, Gloria, and we were talking about doing shows, we're seriously talking about doing shows, not many. But if I never did one again, I could walk away from I could go, that was awesome. It was a great night. It was a great day. Like and not just that, it was a great 4 months of being connected with these guys.
Yeah.
And I could walk away from this, never doing it again, and feel really good about it. But now all of a sudden,
now it's in everybody's blood again.
Right. And not just shows, but, Kurt and I have had, because I'm in St. Louis all the time. And Kurt and I have had coffee twice since the show.
Oh, you have? That's nice.
And, something we just, haven't done. We'll go down to Maplewood where his office is and walk over to this coffee place and hang out for a while. And he's the boss, so he can do whatever he wants. But so anyway, now we're talking about guitar tones. Now we're talking about.
Of course you are.
Right. Stuff that it's like, okay, what would Gravity Kills, what would it need to sound like now that if not, we don't want to, if we did anything, if we got together and did music, nobody wants to revisit any of that necessarily. Maybe the spirit of it. So we started looking at guitar tones and all that stuff. And what's interesting is all the cool guitar tones that we like, are all the same guitar tones that like Tony Iommi used. It's just it's this retro. Like if you listen to a Queens of the Stone Age record,
yeah,
and you listen to a Sabbath record from 71,
yeah,
the guitar tones are the same.
Yeah.
And so we started looking at things like that versus what happened to us as a band when we got in the early 2000s and it was all this crazy new metal stuff going on. And we were kind of lost in all of that and didn't know what we were doing. And those guitar tones changed. And we're like, Kurt and I and Matt, and we made new music. We are not being that. We'd go back to finding those sort of classic guitar tones and kind of, whatever the space is and however many people that would listen to it, Gloria, which wouldn't be many, of course, but mainly if we did anything, if we put it up for free on a website or whatever, we'd want it to sound, at least to us, cool.
Of course.
And
of course.
Yeah. And it would, it's going to sound like us because it'd be all the same guys playing and I can't escape my own vocal, of course. But, so now it's turned into that. And, where I before we got on here, I sent Kurt some video yesterday of some stuff on guitar tones. And I sent some stuff to Matt today and I sent some drum stuff to Doug today. And, stuff that we think, so we're all sort of finding stuff that sounds cool to all of us. And then it's just, and, I don't know where the inspiration necessarily comes from for that, but,
I think it would be so interesting to re-record some of the songs, to kind of like do a best of, but of the hits and re-record them. I think it'd be
we talked about it. But it was part of me, and I don't know that we've had hard discussions about it. So this may be news to the guys, although I've talked to Kurt about it. I don't know how interested I am in that, only in that, like, I like all that.
Because you can't relive that magic.
I don't think you can. I think that was lightning in a bottle, especially Guilty. I mean, we made the most of an opportunity, but there's no way you could create any of those performances, especially vocally. I mean, vocally, there's no auto tune. So I'm I'm pushing sharp all the time in that track, and I'm doing all sorts of stuff that nowadays you might have but even by the time we did the third record, Gloria, we were doing vocal treatments on things, and I have pretty decent pitch. It's not like I go out, I don't sound like shit normally when I go out on stage and sing, but we were doing pretty intense vocal treatments on things, and it wasn't noticeable. And I think so long, my vocals into grids and
certainly not what people do.
No, now.
It's
so I don't know. If we played another show or two and came up with a really good live version of some of these songs, I think that would be worth putting out. Possibly, maybe do 4 or 5 songs with, maybe release an old track that we never gave to a label, and maybe a live track or two, and do something physical, CD, cassette, vinyl, and and then maybe a couple thousand people would buy it, and it would be just sort of cool. But Kurt is really, I think Kurt especially is pushing for this. He's almost an empty nester now. And Kurt works hard at his business,
of course.
But he's in our discussions, he's looking for something that, you do something long enough and it kind of loses its, the architecture thing for him, he loves, because it's very collaborative for him. He doesn't really do much of the design work anymore. He's got amazing people that work for him. So I think he's looking for that, and that was the thing that I think once Kurt left the band, it wasn't musically so much that we didn't lose as much maybe musically as we lost something spiritually when Kurt left the band. Kurt had a way of focusing a vision. Maybe if I was doing something vocally or lyrically, or we're all working on a guitar part or something, Kurt could create a different context for it and create a story around it.
He was very instrumental, and I think that's kind of like, that's probably why he's a great architect, is he is able to kind of have that thread run through everybody and be able to have a vision. I know everybody had a vision, but I think he kind of not kept it together, but it was just kind of kept a certain spirit but you know what? That's what happens with original members.
Yeah.
It changes. When a member changes, it changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The chemistry that we had with Kurt in the band versus, the 3 of us doing a record, it was just different. And, and having Kurt around just in my life in general is, I learned something from him every time I talk to him, and I look at Doug differently too now. Doug, I guess when you get older, what you find is embrace who people are. And
because you're older and you know that not everybody's perfect. Everybody has their shortfalls. Everybody has greatness to them. And it's learning that, to accept the good with the bad, or the bad with the good.
Yeah. And that's where I'm at with these guys now, personally. Like, I love being with them again. I love talking to them. Still got the same vibe, in the band. I'm a little on the intense side at times, and but Doug is just so creative, and and he's so out there sometimes that you embrace it, you just miss it.
Yeah, because you know what? Everybody's still them.
Yeah.
It's as grown up as Doug is now, and he's a father, and he's got this business and whatever. He's still Doug. He is still Doug, no matter what.
Mm-hmm. And when we were rehearsing for the show, at one point he was doing some stuff, and he caught us all. We were trying to get through. I don't remember what song it was, and Doug was just going off in rehearsal, like he just being Doug with this keyboard stand, and he was doing his thing, and he was doing something. He was like on the floor or something, and he caught us all like laughing. But we weren't laughing at him. We were laughing because it's like, well, there's Doug, and so after the song, he's like, "Hey guys, you're laughing at me, and Doug wears his heart on his sleeve, and he was worried that we were laughing at him. I'm like, no, the people who are coming to the show are counting on seeing that. That's going to see a Gravity Kills show. There's far more people that remember that keyboard stand than remember the singer guy.
Yes. Well, I don't know, but
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I understand that. So we were all going, no, man, you got to do that. Whatever you feel like doing, you go as hard at that as you want. Because that's what people.
That's his thing.
That's his thing, and that's what people were showing up. They were showing up to see that.
And he was able to get exactly the same hat again.
He still has he still has those. Those hats are from the original hats that he had made from that guy in San Francisco back in 1995.
Oh my God!
Yeah, when his sister lived in, I think his sister lived in San Francisco at the time. Yeah, and he went out there over. He had bought one and then had gone back out there over the holidays because he only had one. And then he went back out there before we started touring again. And he had this guy make him like, I don't know how many, but he still has several of them, like a bunch of them.
I love it.
So that was
so cool.
It was a fresh hat. And because you wouldn't have wanted to be around. It would smell like, if you ever been in a football locker room or a hockey locker room, that's what those hats would smell like.
Oh no, I bet. I could only imagine. We just have 5 more minutes.
Okay.
So just so you know, in case there's anything else that you would like specifically to talk about.
No, I don't know.
I could listen about the band all day, every day.
So what's your last question then?
Well, my last question, I haven't thought of one, but my last question is, it would be, are you guys going to do it again? It would be, are you going to record something? Are you going to release something? But I already know those answers. So I think my last question is a statement. I don't have a question.
Okay.
Well, I guess it's a question because it's if I come up with a gig that's a special gig, okay, it's a question. If I come up with a gig that's a special gig, do you think everybody would do it?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. The guys are all, we know we can do it now. That was a huge question. You hadn't done it for that long.
Obviously.
Kurt never plays the drums anymore. He never plays. And so, Kurt plays, he's got guitars, his house looks like, his guitar collection's insane. And at his office, his guitar collection's insane. In fact, he gave me, which I said, I can't take this. He gave me a Fender Telecaster that he had modified for me. We've worked out a deal where it's just a loaner. I'm just holding it for him because I was like, dude, I can't take this guitar. So he never plays. I hadn't sang for 85 minutes, and that long, can we get in shape? Can we do all this stuff? Do we have the gear to do it? All those questions are answered. And, we could, at a moment's notice, if we had, let's say, however much lead time, I'm still singing. I sang yesterday. And I did an El Monstero show to go back to.
Oh, you did?
December 23rd. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So, I did have a cigar with them. So, but yeah, we could do it. We know that we would go out and we would represent ourselves in circa 2024 very well. And we would represent the legacy very well. If anybody who saw the band back then, they wouldn't go, oh, these guys suck now.
Well, I want to try and come up with some with a festival date. Even if it's 1 December, but we'll talk about this.
Do it.
Because I think we have to do it because I haven't seen it. So selfishly, it's all about me. So for me,
awesome. That we talk about doing. We would like to do that because there's no pressure on a festival. You got to do a show at, in Chicago at House of Blues or at the Metro or something. It's pressure.
Yeah, of course.
Now festival, you just go out and just let it rip, and there's people there, and it's fun, and go play Rockstar for a weekend.
Well, on that note, this was so. I'm sure we still have millions of things, but if there's any footage you want to send to me, please do.
I'll get some.
And I'm glad we talked. I'm glad we talked, and I'm glad we got to share this because it's really special. And I don't think it's just me that thinks it's special. I think anybody that ever knew Gravity Kills would be so sorry that, like me, they weren't in St. Louis. But anyway.
But there may be other opportunities.
Yes, I am sure there will be. So I'm going to put thought to this, and I'll speak to you soon in any event anyway.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
All right, good seeing you.
Thanks so much for tuning in today, and be sure to follow Gabbing with Girlfriends on here so you never miss an episode. You can also find us on social media for more fun and in-depth conversations. Thank you.